This is Howard Zahniser rehearsing in the headquarters offices of the Wilderness Society in Washington, D.C., some remarks prepared for delivery at the 7th Biennial Wilderness Conference in San Francisco on April 8, 1961. Remarks entitled Wilderness Forever, a paper on the opportunity to plan for wilderness preservation in perpetuity. It is a bold thing for a human being who lives on the earth but a few score years at most to presume upon the eternal and covet perpetuity for any of his undertakings. Yet we who concern ourselves with wilderness preservation are compelled to assume this boldness, and with the courage of this peculiar undertaking, so to order our enterprise as to direct our efforts toward perpetuity, to project into the eternity of the future some of that precious, unspoiled ecological inheritance that has come to us out of the eternity of the past. This is a requisite of our undertaking. And there is yet another of primary importance also. We must deal with actual areas. Only as we preserve areas of wilderness does there exist in reality the basis for a vital interest in all the many aspects of wilderness that give it meaning, not only in our recreation, but also in our science, literature, art, entertainment, our whole culture, our way of living. We who are concerned with wilderness preservation must accordingly have these two clear purposes. We must relate all our effective concerns and efforts to the preservation of actual areas, and we must work for their preservation in perpetuity. At the very beginning of these biennial meetings, at the world's first wilderness conference, we did indeed recognize that protecting areas is only part of our concern. We saw that safeguarding wilderness involves the wildness of ourselves and of other visitors to the wilderness. For we all have an inborn tendency to make over the wilderness rather than to adapt ourselves to it. We emphasized accordingly that in that country designated as wilderness, our concern should always be with the preservation of the wilderness conditions and with the authenticity of the wilderness experience that we have there. This is more important, we saw, than to make the experience of long duration or to provide it for large numbers at any given time. We wished then, as we wish now, of course, to have as many as possible share the wilderness experience. But the wilderness must be wild when we get there, and we want to experience it as wilderness. At the second wilderness conference, we sensed clearly that our only hope to avert the loss of wilderness is in our deliberate effort to preserve what we have. The ramifications of our developing mechanical enterprises, our population growth, our whole civilization are such that only those areas which are set aside for preservation will persist as wilderness. We must then do two things. We must see that an adequate system of wilderness areas is designated for preservation, and then we must allow nothing to alter the wilderness character of the preserve. Then came the challenge of the Echo Park controversy, the test whether any designation can long endure. We passed that test. The third conference theme, as Charlotte Mock, the heroine of all these early conferences, entitled its summary, was working to keep what we had. By the time of the fourth conference in 1955, when we moved across the bay from Berkeley to this metropolis, San Francisco, we were again moving forward toward a clear policy of wilderness protection with a strong legislative program to implement. 2 years later, we were able to see even more clearly the nature of our undertaking. For in the interval between fourth and fifth conferences, national wilderness legislation had actually become a proposal in Congress. One of the most startling realizations 4 years ago was the almost sudden awareness that already there are no areas available for preservation as wilderness which are not already devoted to some other purpose. In other words, not only is it expedient to join wilderness preservation to other purposes, compatible purposes of course, it is actually necessary. This realization gives an urgency and a self-awareness in our efforts to establish policies and programs. It does not discourage us, it informs us. Our opportunity to establish an enduring policy and program for the preservation of wilderness is one of the superlatively great opportunities of our history. We are its custodians. We are the 20th century, mid-20th century Americans who have in part inherited, in part created, a chance to fashion, in the midst of a highly organized, mechanized, urbanized culture, enduring policies and effective programs for preserving wilderness. If our opportunity is lost, the ultimate loss will be wilderness itself. The issue is not whether we shall have parks or wildlife refuges or outdoor recreation areas in forests or parks. The question is, will there live on in any of these areas what we know as wilderness? It is true that we have seen and are seeing difficulties in the way, many wayside distractions, and even temptations of our own. Policies and programs that may endure are opposed by those who wish to exploit commodities in wilderness or see wilderness preserved only tentatively, merely until they are ready to exploit or develop. Thus, the exploiter's fear of perpetual protection emphasizes the need for it. Recreationists looking for areas to serve their good purposes see unspoiled areas of wilderness as invitations for parkways, cabin colonies, picnic grounds, and other conveniences that enhance the landscape for many, but destroy wilderness for everybody. Confronted with such opposition, we ourselves find patience and persistence less interesting than the newness of other good outdoor programs. Reviewing scenic and recreation resources, for example, saving seashores, or establishing great new parks. And as we hesitate, we ourselves in the wilderness are tempted to rationalize airplanes, justify administrative mechanized equipment, tolerate machinery that might save forage by replacing pack animals, or construe wilderness in a more convenient way for ourselves. Our difficulties, our distractions, our temptations diminish and jeopardize our unique perishable opportunities. By not acting promptly and effectively, by modifying our effort for some more practical or more exciting reason, by unwillingness to devote all our resources as needed to the effort that is basic to all our future as wilderness preservers, we are running the risk of sacrificing the basis in reality for all our interest in wilderness. It is a sacrifice that would take from us the scientific values of wilderness, and also the areas of reference which give meaning to the photographs, the motion pictures, paintings, and literature that inform and inspire us and can continue so to do as long as their basis in reality persists in the wilderness itself. The frontier values of the picnic grounds and campsites at the end of the road would perish too, and the wilderness meaning of the prospect from many miles of our best roadsides. We would gain a whole world of well-developed outdoor recreation and lose our sole purpose as wilderness preservers.